First up is a film called Vacation Friends, and it's out on Hulu, and honestly, this is probably the best thing that could have happened to this film. I believe it was one of those movies that when Disney acquired Fox, this had been in production or had already been made, and they figured out a home for it, and that home is on streaming, and Hulu, the concept is two couples are on vacation and they come from completely different worlds and they become friends. Said couples are played by Lil Rel Howery and Yvonne Orji and John Cena and Meredith Hagner. And I have said before, I am a sucker for big, bulky people in comedy roles, especially when they're kind of playing doofuses, but not just doofuses, but in this case, it's like weirdly skilled at some things, but just completely off in their own worlds for other things. So that's why I watched the movie, mostly for John Cena. It was fine. I laughed at a couple points, but I was also not expecting anything from this movie. Nothing whatsoever. It's also awkward at a few points, and I feel like it's cut from a similar cloth as, I mean, it's not quite as good, but I also haven't seen this movie in a long time, Meet the Parents, where people behave in ways that almost no real human being behaves in, right? So you've got Lil Rel Howery's relationship. He's like a sort of uptight, he owns a construction business. He wants to propose to his girlfriend. Things go awry, and John Cena and Meredith Hagner play these very lackadaisical, like the world is their oyster, not worried about anything really, people who they meet on vacation, and they'll just figure out their problems as they come. They are not inhibited by most of societal's constraints. Yeah, again, like the more I talk about them, the more I'm like, okay, it wasn't that great. But I think it's a fine background watch. I would not have paid money for this movie, and so I'm so relieved that it was available on Hulu. That is, as I said before, the right choice for this. If you like that sort of dumb situational fish out of water, making people really uncomfortable, like this isn't a spoiler, but it is a spoiler, people accidentally taking drugs because they didn't know there were drugs in something and everyone else thinking it's really funny. That's the type of humor this is. I'm not condoning that type of thing, but I feel like that tells you a lot about this. And then again, people acting really awkwardly. So if you're someone who gets squeamish when other people are uncomfortable, this is going to be your worst nightmare of a film. But for everyone else, with very low expectations, I would give it a 3 out of 5, but that's keeping it on the scale of almost no expectations whatsoever. So that's Vacation Friends. And then the other thing I have this week is called The Chair, and it's out on Netflix, and it's a 6-episode miniseries, and it stars my beloved Sandra Oh. It also stars Jay Duplass, Holland Taylor, Nana Mensah, Bob Balaban, and I had heard a lot about this, and then I didn't hear anything about it for a really, really long time, and Sandra Oh plays the first woman and woman of color chair for the English department at a college, and you can imagine all the strain that goes with this. And I, full disclosure, have a mother who is a person of color who has been in a leadership position in academia, and she hath vouched for the show, and having just overheard conversations with her, the show seems very realistic in many senses, but there are other senses that it just feels it's so not living up to its own potential. Interestingly enough, it's co-created by Amanda Peet, and it's executive produced by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, the creators of Game of Thrones. This was part of their huge Netflix deal. Amanda Peet is married to one of them. So not what one was expecting, maybe, from the Game of Thrones people, but I think my biggest frustration with The Chair is there are so many micro moments or like individual scenes in it that just feel so accurate. Also, just as a person of color, let alone taking out the academia part, but just any person of color who is trying to forge their way in a field that has been dominated by not people of color and especially like not women, right? That felt very authentic. Also, there were a lot of things that just felt really authentic to the Asian American experience, but by the same token, there are all these just weird, dumb things that sort of detract from the series for me. I still ended up watching the whole thing. I just thought I was going to be much, much more invested. I think it's a lot of it, just a lot of characters with foot in mouth, but in a different way than something like Vacation Friends, where I'm like, you are characters who should know better. At least the characters of Vacation Friends have kind of been set up to be like, no, this is just how they are. These are being presented as just these hyper intelligent people, and that doesn't mean you're socially intelligent, but still, I wanted it to be better than it was. I think it's still watchable, but I think it's mostly going to appeal to a more limited subset of people than it could have.